Update: I was lying on the kitchen floor in agony while my husband bailed on me to go on a trip with his sister. I ended up in the hospital for emergency surgery. That's when I realized I'd had enough and decided to divorce his selfish ass. After that call, I felt a little braver. I spent the rest of the morning researching divorce lawyers while Lily was at school. It was overwhelming, so many legal terms, so much paperwork, but I was determined to figure it out. That afternoon, when I picked Lily up from school, she could tell something was off. "Mommy, are you sad?" she asked as we walked home. I squeezed her hand. "A little bit, sweetie," I said, "but I'm also hopeful. Things are going to be changing around here, but I promise it's going to be okay." She nodded, looking so serious with her little furrowed brow. "Is Daddy going away?" "We're not sure yet, honey," I told her, "but no matter what happens, Daddy and I both love you very much." That night, David came home late. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by printouts about divorce proceedings. When he saw what I was looking at, his face twisted into a nasty sneer. "Still playing at this divorce nonsense?" he scoffed. I looked him straight in the eye. "It's not nonsense, David. I'm serious about this." He rolled his eyes. "You'll never go through with it," he said. "You need me." Something in me just snapped. All the fear and doubt I'd been feeling all day turned into fierce determination. "No, David," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need you. I've realized that now. What I need is respect and a partner who values me and Lily. And that's not you." He stormed off to the spare room, slamming the door so hard that the pictures rattled on the walls. I sat there at the kitchen table, my heart pounding but feeling stronger than I had in years. The next few weeks were absolute chaos. First things first, I had to find a lawyer. I must have met with at least 5 different attorneys before I found one I felt comfortable with. Her name was Sarah, and she was the no-nonsense type who didn't sugarcoat anything. I liked her immediately. "Evelyn," she said during our first meeting, "this isn't going to be easy, but from what you've told me, it's necessary. Are you ready for this?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "I have to be," I told her. "For Lily and for myself." So we got the ball rolling. Paperwork, and more paperwork. I was drowning in forms and legal jargon. But each document I filled out felt like a step toward freedom. When David got served with the divorce papers, he hit the roof. I think he really believed I wouldn't go through with it. He stormed into the house that evening, waving the papers around like a madman. "What the hell is this, Evelyn?" he shouted. "You're really doing this?" I stood my ground, even though inside, I was shaking. "Yes, David," I said. "I told you I was serious." He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was cold and mean. "You'll never make it on your own," he sneered. "You're nothing without me." Those words hurt, I won't lie, but they also made me more determined than ever. From that point on, David turned into this whole other person. It was like living with a stranger, and not a nice one. He'd make snide comments about how I'd fail, how Lily would suffer because of my selfishness. It was tough, especially on Lily. Poor thing didn't understand why Daddy was being so mean. The legal process dragged on and on. Meetings with lawyers, negotiations about assets, discussions about custody arrangements for Lily. It was exhausting, both emotionally and physically. There were days when I just wanted to curl up in bed and never come out. But then I'd look at Lily, see her smile or hear her laugh, and I'd find the strength to keep going. She was the reason I was doing this, after all. I wanted her to grow up seeing a strong, independent mother, not someone who let herself be walked all over. One day, during a particularly heated discussion about dividing our assets, David sneered at me. "You're making a huge mistake, Evelyn. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't hack it on your own." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, David. The only mistake I made was not doing this years ago." The look on his face was as if he'd finally realized that the woman he'd married, the one he thought he could control and manipulate, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone stronger. Finally, the day came, and the divorce was finalized. I stood outside the courthouse, holding those papers in my hand, and I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Now things started to get interesting. Karma decided it was time to pay David a visit. News of our divorce quickly spread through David's workplace, and it turns out people weren't too impressed with someone who would abandon his wife during an emergency surgery. I heard through the grapevine that David's colleagues were giving him the cold shoulder. People who used to laugh at his jokes were now avoiding him in the break room. His boss even pulled him aside for a chat about family values and company image. But the best part? David and Rachel's supposedly perfect sibling relationship wasn't so perfect anymore. I heard they had a massive blowout at a family dinner, lots of blame throwing and name calling. Guess they finally realized that actions have consequences. Meanwhile, I was busy rebuilding my life. I landed a job at a small accounting firm, working for an amazing woman named Janet. She took a chance on me, even though I'd been out of the workforce for years. One day, while picking Lily up from a school sports event, I overheard the most satisfying conversation. David was there as well, trying to flirt with one of the other moms, laying on his usual charm. "So, are you free this weekend?" he asked, flashing that smile that used to make me weak at the knees. The mom looked him up and down, then said, "Cool as you please. Sorry, I don't date men who abandon their wives in medical emergencies. I have standards." I had to bite my lip to keep from cheering out loud. David's face turned this interesting shade of purple, and he practically ran to his car. That night, after I tucked Lily into bed, I sat by the window, looking out at the stars. For the first time in forever, I felt excited about the future. Sure, it wasn't going to be easy: single motherhood, rebuilding my career, none of that's a walk in the park. But I was ready for it. All of it. Because I'd finally found something I'd lost a long time ago, myself. One quiet Saturday morning, I sat in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and soaking in the silence. With Lily at a sleepover, the entire day was mine. That's when it struck me how far I'd come. From the terrified woman crumpled on the kitchen floor to this confident, content, and at peace version of myself. Then the doorbell rang, cutting through my thoughts. I opened the door and nearly dropped my coffee. It was David. He looked different, smaller somehow, less sure of himself. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quiet. "Can we talk?" We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I told him I wanted a divorce all those months ago. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone." "Thank you, David," I said. "I appreciate that, but it's too late. I've moved on." "I understand," he said. I wanted you to know that I see now how badly I messed up. With you. With Lily." We talked for a bit longer, about Lily, about our past, about the future. It was civil, even friendly at times. As he was leaving, he turned to me one last time. "You look good, Evelyn," he said. "Happy?" "I'm happy, David. Really happy." After he left, I stood in the doorway for a while, just thinking. It felt like the final page of a chapter being turned. The David and Evelyn story was well and truly over. Later that day, I called Michael and my parents. We decided to have a little celebration dinner, nothing fancy, just family time. As we sat around the table, laughing and talking, I looked at each of their faces. There was Michael, my rock through all of this, my parents, who'd supported me even when they didn't fully understand, and Lily, my beautiful, resilient daughter, giggling at one of her uncle's silly jokes. In that moment, surrounded by love and laughter, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led me here, to this place of strength, self-respect, and joy. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, she looked up at me with those big eyes of hers. "Mommy," she said, "are you happy?" I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "Mommy's very happy." Later, as I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who'd been so lost and afraid all those months ago. This woman was stronger, wiser, and, yes, happier. I climbed into bed, feeling content in a way I hadn't in years. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what it would bring.